I wasn't supposed to see Sawyer there. That's the first thing that went through my head the second I spotted him across the parking lot, standing under the flickering neon sign of a place he definitely shouldn't have been. And honestly, if he'd looked up even 1 second earlier, he would have caught me staring like a complete idiot. The rain had just started coming down, thin and cold, turning the pavement glossy under the streetlights. I had only stopped there because my phone battery was dying, and the gas station was the only place still open at almost midnight. I was exhausted. My shift at the warehouse had gone late. My back hurt, and all I wanted was an energy drink and a hot shower. Instead, I saw Sawyer. Sawyer Moreno, my best friend's older brother. The same Sawyer who spent every Sunday acting like the responsible golden child at family cookouts. The same Sawyer who wore clean button-ups, worked construction during the day, and constantly lectured his younger brother about staying out of trouble. The same Sawyer who supposedly hated places like this. Because the building behind him wasn't just a random bar. It was a gay club, a discreet one too. No rainbow flags outside. No flashy signs, just a dark entrance tucked between an auto repair shop and an abandoned laundromat downtown. If you didn't know what it was, you'd probably drive past it without noticing. But I knew. Mostly because I'd spent the last 6 months trying to work up the courage to actually go inside. And now Sawyer was standing right there in front of it, alone, looking nervous. I ducked immediately behind my car door before he could see me. My heart was pounding so hard it actually hurt. No way, I muttered under my breath. For a second, I honestly thought maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But then I peeked over the roof of my car again, and there he was, shoving his hands into the pockets of his dark hoodie while glancing around like he was making sure nobody recognized him. He looked different tonight. Not physically. Sawyer always looked good. That wasn't exactly a secret. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair, always a little messy no matter how much effort he put into it. He had that rough, tired kind of handsome that made people stare without meaning to. But usually he carried himself with confidence. Tonight he looked tense, like he was fighting himself just standing there. Then the club door opened. A guy stepped outside laughing with someone behind him, and the neon light spilled briefly across Sawyer's face. I saw panic flash through his expression, and before I could even process what was happening, he turned sharply, and our eyes met across the parking lot. For one horrible second, neither of us moved. Sawyer froze completely. I froze too. The rain kept falling around us while we just stared at each other like two idiots caught doing something illegal. Then his face changed. Not anger, not embarrassment exactly. Worse, fear. He started walking toward me fast. "Douglas," he said the second he reached my car, voice low and tight. "What are you doing here?" I blinked at him. "I could ask you the same thing." His jaw flexed immediately. Up close he looked even more nervous. Tiny drops of rain clung to his eyelashes and darkened his hair. His chest rose heavily under the hoodie like he'd been psyching himself up for something before I ruined it. "I'm serious," he said. "Why are you here?" I stopped for gas. "At midnight? You're literally standing outside a gay club." That shut him up. His eyes darted away from mine, and suddenly everything clicked into place so hard it made my stomach twist. All those weird moments over the years. The way Sawyer never talked about girls despite every woman in town flirting with him. How tense he got anytime conversations turned remotely personal. The strange looks I used to catch him giving me before quickly looking away. Jesus Christ. I felt dizzy. Sawyer swallowed hard. "You can't tell anyone." The words came out almost immediately, like he'd been holding them in since the second he recognized me. I stared at him. He looked genuinely terrified. Not dramatic terrified either. Real fear. And honestly, that hit me harder than anything else. Because I'd known Sawyer almost 4 years now. Underneath the calm attitude and sarcastic comments, he was one of the steadiest guys I'd ever met. Seeing him like this felt wrong. "I'm not going to out you," I said quietly. He searched my face carefully like he wasn't sure whether to believe me. Then he exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders loosened just a little. "You coming in?" I asked before I could stop myself. Sawyer blinked. "What?" "The club," I said, nodding toward the entrance. "You've been standing out here like 20 minutes. You saw me that long? I parked before you got here." He looked horrified by that information. I couldn't help it. I laughed a little, and weirdly enough, that seemed to break some of the tension. Sawyer rubbed a hand over his face and shook his head. "I don't even know why I came." "That surprised me. You've never been?" "No." "Seriously?" He gave me a look, devilish. "I grew up in a family where my dad thought watching two men hug on TV meant society was collapsing." Fair point. Rain dripped steadily off the hood of my car between us. Sawyer shoved his hands deeper into his pockets again before speaking quieter. "I drove here 3 different nights this month, but never went inside." He nodded once. Something about that confession got to me more than it should have, because I understood it. That fear, that hesitation, the endless cycle of almost letting yourself be honest before chickening out at the last second. I'd lived it too. Sawyer glanced at me carefully. "You've been in there before?" I hesitated, then I admitted, "No." One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "So, we're both pathetic." I laughed again. "Pretty much." For a second, we just stood there, listening to the rain. Then Sawyer looked toward the club entrance one more time before muttering, "I should leave." But he didn't move. Neither did I. And suddenly, the space between us felt strangely charged. Like now that we both knew, something invisible had shifted. Sawyer looked back at me slowly. "You want to go in together?" The question hit me so unexpectedly my brain stalled. "What?" His expression tightened instantly, like he regretted asking. "Forget it." "No," I said quickly. "I just didn't expect that." He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Honestly, I don't think I can walk in there alone." Neither could I, which was exactly the problem. I looked at the club entrance, then back at him. Sawyer was watching me carefully now, close enough that I could see the nervous tension in his face despite the darkness. And maybe it was stupid, maybe it was reckless, but there was something about standing there with him in the rain, both of us caught in a truth we clearly weren't ready for, that made it impossible to say no. So before I could overthink it, I nodded. "Okay." Sawyer stared at me for a second, then slowly he smiled. And I swear to God, that smile alone nearly destroyed me. The second we started walking toward the entrance, my nerves hit me all at once. It felt stupid, honestly. I was 24 years old. Sawyer was 28. We weren't teenagers sneaking into some place illegal, but the closer we got to the door, the more my chest tightened anyway. Beside me, Sawyer looked just as tense. "You can still back out," I muttered quietly. He glanced sideways at me. "You trying to convince me or yourself?" "Both." That actually made him laugh under his breath. The sound surprised me. I wasn't used to seeing this version of him. Softer, nervous, real. Usually Sawyer always seemed so controlled, like nothing could throw him off balance. But tonight, I could practically feel the anxiety rolling off him. The bouncer barely looked at us before waving us inside, and immediately everything changed. Warm air hit my face first, mixed with bass-heavy music vibrating through the floor. The lighting inside was dark and gold, low enough to feel private, but bright enough to see people crowded around tables in the bar. I froze for half a second just taking it all in. Men everywhere, laughing, talking, dancing, touching each other openly without looking over their shoulders first. It sounds dramatic now, but honestly, I'd never seen anything like it in person before, not where I grew up. Beside me, Sawyer had gone completely silent. I looked at him. His eyes were scanning the room slowly, almost cautiously, like he couldn't believe this place actually existed. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said immediately. Then after a pause, "No." I smiled a little. "Same." We made our way toward the bar mostly because standing awkwardly by the entrance made us look suspicious as hell. Sawyer stayed close behind me through the crowd, too close. Every time someone brushed past us, his chest bumped lightly against my back, and my brain short-circuited a little more each time. We finally squeezed into 2 empty spots at the bar. Sawyer exhaled heavily beside me. "Jesus." "What?" There are way more people here than I expected. I laughed. What did you think this was going to be? 4 guys sitting around a campfire talking about feelings? For the first time that night, Sawyer actually grinned. And unfortunately for me, seeing him relaxed made him even hotter. The bartender walked over. Sawyer immediately stiffened again. It was honestly kind of adorable. "What can I get you guys?" the bartender asked. Sawyer looked at me like he suddenly forgot how ordering drinks worked. I stepped in before he embarrassed himself. 2 beers. The bartender nodded and walked off. Sawyer rubbed his palms against his jeans. I feel like everybody knows I've never done this before. Nobody cares, I said. He looked unconvinced. I leaned closer slightly so he could hear me over the music. Seriously, half the people here are too busy staring at the hot guys. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them, because Sawyer turned toward me immediately. And for one dangerous second, either of us looked away. The music pounded around us. His face was close now, close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw and the tiny scar near his chin I'd always weirdly liked. Then the bartender came back with our drinks, and the moment shattered. Probably for the best. Sawyer grabbed his beer quickly and took a long swallow. "You nervous?" I asked. "Yes. At least you're honest." He gave me a look over the bottle. "You're shaking too." Damn. I looked down. He was right. My hand actually was trembling slightly against the counter. Sawyer noticed my embarrassment immediately, and his expression softened. "That makes me feel better," he admitted quietly. I don't know why that affected me so much. Maybe because it suddenly stopped feeling like I was alone in this. For the next half hour, things slowly got easier. The music stayed loud enough to kill awkward silences. The beer helped too. We talked. At first just random stuff. Work, movies, his idiot younger brother. But gradually the conversation shifted into things we'd somehow never said out loud before. "When did you know?" I asked eventually. Sawyer stared into his drink for a long moment before answering. "I think I always knew." His voice had gone quieter. "I just got really good at pretending I didn't." Something twisted painfully in my chest hearing that. He shrugged one shoulder. "What about you?" "High school, probably." "You tell anyone?" I snorted softly. "In our town? Hell no." Sawyer nodded like he completely understood. Because he did. That was the weird thing. For years I'd secretly felt isolated around him because I assumed he could never understand this part of me. Now suddenly it felt like maybe he understood better than anybody. A group of guys pushed past us toward the dance floor, laughing loudly. Sawyer watched them carefully. Then he muttered, "Must be nice." "What?" "Not caring who sees." I looked at him. There was something sad in his expression now, something tired. And before I could think better of it, I said quietly, "You're here, though." His eyes shifted to mine immediately. The look he gave me then made my stomach flip hard, because it wasn't just gratitude. It was something warmer, something heavier. Sawyer leaned a little closer toward me. "You know what's messed up?" he said. "What?" "I spent years convincing myself I wasn't gay." I smiled slightly. "That usually doesn't work." "No, apparently not," he laughed softly, "especially because every time I came over to my brother's place, he stopped suddenly." I frowned. "What?" Sawyer looked away toward the crowd, then back at me again, and the tension that entered the space between us hit so hard I almost stopped breathing. "Never mind," he muttered. "No," I said immediately. "You can't stop there." He hesitated. Then finally, "Every time I came over, I kept noticing you." My heart slammed against my ribs. Sawyer looked embarrassed the second he admitted it. "I tried not to," he said quickly. "I knew it was a bad idea. I honestly forgot how breathing worked for a second. Because I'd spent literal years trying not to stare at him too. And somehow, he'd been doing the exact same thing." "You noticed me?" I asked stupidly. Sawyer gave me an incredulous look. "Douglas, come on." The way he said my name nearly killed me. Heat rushed straight through my chest. The music around us suddenly felt distant compared to the tension building at that bar stool. Sawyer's eyes dropped briefly to my mouth, just for a second, but I noticed. And judging by the way his jaw tightened afterward, He realized I noticed too. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Then suddenly someone crashed into Sawyer's shoulder from behind while stumbling through the crowd. Sawyer instinctively grabbed my waist to steady himself. Everything in my body locked up instantly. His hand stayed there, firm, warm, and way too natural. Sawyer realized what he was doing at the exact same moment I did. His hand tightened against my waist for half a second before he pulled away quickly. "Sorry," he muttered. But his face had changed. So had mine, probably. Because suddenly all the air between us felt different, charged, too aware. Neither of us looked at each other for a second. Sawyer picked up his beer again, mostly to have something to do with his hands. But I noticed a slight tremor when he lifted it to his mouth. That made two of us. "You want to get some air?" I asked quietly. He nodded immediately, probably too quickly. We pushed through the crowd and stepped outside into the cold night air again. The rain had mostly stopped now, leaving the streets slick and shining under the lights downtown. For a second, neither of us spoke. The muffled bass from inside vibrated faintly through the walls behind us. Sawyer leaned against the brick wall near the entrance and exhaled hard. "Okay," he muttered. "I think I'm having a crisis." I laughed softly. "Little late for one." "No, seriously," he said, rubbing a hand down his face. "I don't know what the hell I'm doing tonight." I looked over at him carefully. Without the dim lighting inside, I could see the nerves on his face again. The tension around his eyes. The uncertainty. And weirdly, it made him seem even more attractive, more human. "I think you're doing fine," I said. Sawyer glanced toward me slowly. "You think so?" "Yeah." A long silence settled between us. Cars hissed across wet pavement nearby. Somebody inside the club started laughing loudly. Sawyer kept staring at me. "You know what's messing me up?" he admitted finally. "What?" "I can't tell if this feels scary or—" He stopped himself. "Or what?" His eyes held mine. "Good." The word hit me straight in the chest, because it felt good to me too. Way too good. Sawyer looked away first this time, jaw flexing slightly like he was fighting with himself again. "I shouldn't have told you all that inside." "Why?" "Because now I can't pretend anymore." Something about the honesty in his voice made my pulse spike. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. Not enough to touch him, but enough that the space between us suddenly felt very small. "You really noticed me all those years?" I asked quietly. Sawyer let out a low breath. "Douglas, no, seriously." He looked at me for a long moment. Then finally he nodded once. "Yeah." My stomach flipped hard. Sawyer rubbed the back of his neck again, clearly uncomfortable with how exposed he suddenly was. "I used to come over to my brother's apartment and tell myself not to stare at you," he admitted. "Then you'd walk out wearing those stupid gray sweatpants and ruin my entire week." I choked out a laugh immediately. Sawyer groaned. "Don't laugh. I'm already humiliated enough. That's your confession? You have no idea." I was still grinning when I looked back up at him. And that's when I realized Sawyer wasn't joking anymore. His eyes had dropped to my mouth again, slowly, intentionally. Every muscle in my body tightened. The tension between us became almost unbearable then, because now we both knew. No more guessing, no more pretending. Sawyer swallowed hard. "I've wanted to do something all night." My heart nearly exploded. "What?" His voice lowered. "This." And then he kissed me. It happened so suddenly I barely processed it at first. Sawyer grabbed the front of my hoodie gently and pulled me toward him, and then his mouth was on mine. Warm, careful, tentative for exactly 1 second. Then everything snapped. I kissed him back immediately, harder than I meant to. Months, honestly years, of buried attraction crashed into me all at once. Sawyer made this low sound against my mouth that nearly destroyed me on the spot. His hand slid to my waist again, firmer this time, pulling me closer against him. And Jesus Christ, I felt how solid he was. The broad warmth of his chest pressed against mine, the rough scrape of stubble against my skin, the restrained desperation in the way he kissed me, like he'd been holding himself back forever. I grabbed his hoodie instinctively and kissed him deeper. Sawyer exhaled sharply through his nose before backing me lightly against the brick wall beside the entrance. Not aggressive, just hungry. Like he couldn't quite believe this was actually happening either. The cold brick hit my back while his body pressed close enough to warm me completely despite the night air. And honestly, my brain was gone, completely useless. I'd imagined kissing Sawyer before, plenty of times, but nothing prepared me for the reality of it. The way he touched me carefully at first, like he was scared I'd disappear. The way his breathing got rougher every time I kissed him back harder. The way his hands kept tightening unconsciously against my waist, like he needed reassurance I was real. Finally, he pulled back slightly, both of us breathing hard. Sawyer stared at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, almost stunned. "Holy," he whispered. I laughed breathlessly. "Yeah." He shook his head once like he genuinely couldn't process what just happened. Then suddenly his face changed. Panic flickered across it again. He stepped back slightly. "Wait." My stomach dropped immediately. "What?" Sawyer rubbed both hands over his face hard. "Damn. What's wrong?" "This is complicated." I blinked at him. "You literally just shoved me against the wall." "I know. And now you're panicking?" "Yes." Despite everything, I laughed again. Sawyer pointed at me accusingly. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make me less nervous." "You kissed me first." "I'm aware of that, Daedalus." His voice cracked slightly on my name, and somehow that made everything even hotter. Sawyer groaned quietly like he realized it too. For a second we just looked at each other again. Then he admitted softly, "I've been trying not to think about kissing you for months." That confession hit me almost harder than the kiss itself, because I knew exactly what he meant. I stepped toward him again slowly. Sawyer watched me carefully this time, but didn't move away. "You don't have to panic," I said quietly. His eyes searched mine. "You sure?" "Yeah." Another long silence stretched between us. Then Sawyer looked toward the club entrance before back at me again. "You want to get out of here?" The way he said it sent heat straight through my chest, because I knew he didn't just mean the club. My heart started pounding again the second Sawyer asked that. Not because I didn't want to go with him. Honestly, the opposite. That was the problem. The way he was looking at me right now made it very hard to think clearly. Rainwater still clung to the dark strands of his hair, and his lips looked slightly swollen from kissing me. Every few seconds his eyes dropped back to my mouth like he was trying not to do it. "You mean leave?" I asked quietly. Sawyer gave me a look. "You know what I mean." Heat rushed straight through me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I nodded once. "Okay." The tension in his face shifted instantly. Relief, excitement, nerves, probably all three. Sawyer glanced toward the parking lot. "You drove?" "Yeah, good," he muttered, "because I don't think I should drive right now." I laughed softly. "That bad?" He stepped closer again until our shoulders nearly brushed. "You kissed me back," he said quietly. "I'm trying very hard to act normal right now. That nearly killed me." We started walking toward my car side by side. Neither of us talked much during those first few minutes. The silence wasn't awkward exactly, just heavy. Every tiny thing suddenly felt charged. The brush of our arms, the sound of Sawyer breathing beside me, the memory of his mouth on mine replaying non-stop in my head. By the time we reached my car, my nerves were completely shot again. Sawyer stood beside the passenger door while I unlocked it. Then he looked at me carefully and asked, "You sure about this?" I knew what he was really asking. Not just about leaving together, about everything. The kiss, us, whatever this suddenly was. And honestly, despite the adrenaline and nerves and confusion, I'd never been more sure of anything. "Yeah," I said quietly. Sawyer held my gaze another second before climbing into the passenger seat. The drive to my apartment felt surreal. The city lights blurred across the windshield, while soft music played low through the speakers. But neither of us paid attention to any of it. I was hyper-aware of Sawyer sitting beside me, one hand resting against his thigh, the smell of rain and cologne lingering around him, the way he kept glancing at me whenever he thought I wasn't noticing. At one red light, I looked over and caught him staring openly. Sawyer didn't even deny it. "You're really pretty," he said suddenly. My brain stopped functioning. "What?" He looked slightly embarrassed after saying it, but he didn't take it back. "I'm serious." Nobody had ever heard Sawyer Moreno call another man pretty before. Hell, I probably hadn't either. Something warm spread painfully through my chest. "You realize you're having a major self-discovery moment in my Honda Civic right now?" I asked. Sawyer snorted immediately. "Shut up." I grinned. Then after a second, I asked quietly, "You think you're bi?" His expression shifted. Thoughtful. Complicated. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe." Another pause. "Or maybe I just wanted you specifically." That hit way harder than it should have. I looked back at the road quickly because my face had definitely gone red. Sawyer noticed too. His laugh this time was softer, warmer, and somehow that felt even more intimate than the kissing. By the time we pulled into my apartment complex, the tension between us had become almost unbearable again. I parked. Neither of us moved immediately. Sawyer looked out the windshield for a second before exhaling slowly. "This is insane." "A little. If your neighbors see me, they'll assume you're helping me move furniture or something." Sawyer looked over at me dryly. "At 1 o'clock in the morning?" I shrugged. "Very heavy furniture." That finally broke the tension enough to make him laugh again. God, I liked hearing that sound. We headed upstairs quietly. The entire walk to my apartment door felt weirdly intimate. Sawyer stayed close behind me in the narrow hallway, and every time I slowed down slightly, his chest almost brushed my back. By the time I unlocked the door, my pulse was racing all over again. I stepped inside first. Sawyer followed slowly, looking around like he'd never been here before, even though he definitely had. The apartment suddenly felt much smaller with him inside it alone. More private, more dangerous. I shut the door behind us. The click of the lock sounded absurdly loud. For a second, neither of us spoke. Sawyer looked at me carefully. Then his eyes dropped to my mouth again. And that was it. I crossed the room first this time. Sawyer met me halfway. The second we kissed again, all the nervousness from earlier disappeared under something hotter. Nadia. His hand slid firmly to my waist, while mine grabbed the front of his hoodie, pulling him closer immediately. Sawyer kissed like a man who'd spent years holding himself back. Like now that he finally started, he couldn't stop. Every movement still carried hesitation underneath it, though. Tiny pauses where he seemed shocked by his own confidence. That somehow made it even better. I backed him lightly against the kitchen counter without breaking the kiss. Sawyer exhaled sharply against my mouth. His fingers tightened at my sides instantly. "Douglas," he muttered quietly. The way he said my name made my stomach flip violently. I kissed him again before he could say anything else. Slower this time. Closer. Sawyer's breathing got uneven almost immediately. One of his hands slid up my side carefully, like he was still figuring out what he was allowed to touch. Then finally, he pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine. We were both breathing hard now. Sawyer laughed softly under his breath. "I cannot believe this is happening." "You keep saying that." "Because 5 hours ago I thought I was straight." I started laughing immediately. Sawyer groaned. "I'm serious. You kissed me like you've been practicing secretly for years." "That's because I've been thinking about it secretly for years." The honesty in his voice hit me hard again. Sawyer looked at me quietly for another second before asking, "Can I stay tonight?" Something about the softness in his voice completely changed the mood. Less frantic now, more vulnerable. And honestly, that got to me even more than the kissing had. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "You can stay." Sawyer looked relieved enough by my answer that it almost hurt to see, like he'd expected me to change my mind, like part of him still couldn't believe this was real. Neither of us moved for a second after that. We just stood there, close together in my kitchen, breathing the same air, still slightly dazed from everything that had happened tonight. Then Sawyer glanced down at himself and laughed quietly. "I'm soaked." I looked down too. His hoodie was still damp from the rain outside, dark patches spreading across the fabric. Mine wasn't much better. "You want to talk?" I asked. "Probably." I headed toward the bathroom while Sawyer wandered awkwardly around the apartment behind me. It was weirdly domestic considering we literally had our first kiss less than an hour ago. I grabbed a towel from the cabinet and handed it over. Sawyer took it with a quiet thanks before rubbing it through his hair. Watching him do that should not have been as distracting as it was. The wet, dark curls falling messily over his forehead afterward definitely didn't help. "You hungry?" I asked, mostly to give myself something normal to focus on. Sawyer shrugged. "Honestly, I think my body forgot how food works tonight." I laughed. "Fair." He leaned against the bathroom doorway, watching me carefully now, expression softer than I'd ever seen from him before. "You're weirdly calm about all this," he said. "I'm not calm." "You seem calm." "That's because internally I'm having a medical emergency." That got another laugh out of him. Then his expression shifted, slightly more serious. "I mean it, though," he said quietly. "You're handling this better than I am." I leaned back against the sink. "I think I figured this stuff out a long time ago," I admitted. "You're getting hit with all of it at once." Sawyer nodded slowly. "Yeah." There was no shame in his face when he said it now, mostly just overwhelm. I like that, like seeing him slowly stop fighting himself. Sawyer looked down briefly before asking, "Can I tell you something kind of embarrassing?" "Depends how embarrassing." He smiled faintly. "When I saw you in that parking lot tonight, my first thought wasn't panic." "No?" "No." He looked up at me again. "My first thought was that you looked really good standing there." My stomach flipped hard. Sawyer shook his head immediately afterward, like he couldn't believe he admitted that out loud. "I sound insane." "You sound honest," which is new for me apparently. The tension between us had softened now into something warmer, less frantic, more intimate. Sawyer stepped closer again slowly until he was standing right in front of me. "You know what's weird?" he murmured. "What?" "I always thought if this ever happened to me," he paused, "I thought it would feel wrong." I stayed quiet. Sawyer's eyes held mine steadily now, but it doesn't. Something emotional moved through me hearing that, because I knew how much fear probably sat behind those words. Sawyer looked down at my mouth again before speaking softer. "It actually feels—" He stopped himself. "Good?" I suggested quietly. A tiny smile appeared on his face. "Yeah." Then he kissed me again, gentler this time, slower, the kind of kiss that wasn't fueled entirely by adrenaline anymore. Sawyer's hand slid lightly along my jaw while mine settled against his chest, and I could feel his heartbeat pounding under the damp fabric of his hoodie. Still nervous, still real. He pulled back slightly after a few seconds, forehead resting against mine again. "You have no idea how long I wanted to do that," he admitted softly. I smiled a little. "Actually, I think I do." That made him laugh under his breath. Then suddenly his expression changed like he remembered something. "Wait," he said. "What?" "Your roommate. I live alone." The visible relief on his face was immediate. I started laughing. "Were you seriously worried about that?" "Yes." "You're adorable." Sawyer pointed at me warningly. "Don't start calling me adorable. You literally panicked about a fictional roommate. I'm trying to maintain some dignity tonight." "That ship sailed when you confessed the sweatpants thing." He groaned loudly and covered his face with the towel again. I couldn't stop smiling. Honestly, that surprised me most tonight. Not the kissing, not the attraction, the ease of it. Somehow being around Sawyer suddenly felt lighter than it ever had before, even with all the nerves between us. Maybe because either of us was pretending anymore. Eventually we moved into the living room, sitting at opposite ends of the couch at first, like we were trying to act normal. That lasted maybe 30 seconds. Sawyer slowly shifted closer, then closer again, until finally our legs touched lightly. Neither of us moved away. The TV played some random late-night comedy either of us paid attention to. Sawyer kept glancing at me during quiet moments, like he still needed reassurance I was actually there. At one point he said quietly, "I can't believe I almost drove home tonight." I looked over at him. "You would have regretted it." Yeah, he admitted immediately. I think I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I walked into that club. A silence settled between us. Then Sawyer added softly, "Guess I got my answer." The way he looked at me after saying it made my chest ache a little, because underneath all the attraction and tension, there was something else forming now too, something real. Sawyer leaned back into the couch cushions beside me with a tired exhale. "It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning," he muttered. "Big night for you." "You have no idea," I smiled. Then after a second I asked quietly, "You scared about tomorrow?" Sawyer went silent. His eyes drifted toward the dark window across the room. "Yeah," he admitted finally, "because this becomes real outside tonight." I understood exactly what he meant. Inside this apartment, everything felt safe somehow, private, simple. But tomorrow meant reality. His family, his friends, his entire life suddenly looking different. I reached over without really thinking and touched his hand lightly where it rested beside him on the couch. Sawyer looked down at it immediately. Then he turned his hand over and intertwined our fingers slowly. The softness of that simple gesture nearly wrecked me more than the kissing had. "You don't have to figure everything out tonight," I said quietly. Sawyer squeezed my hand once. "I know." Then, after a pause, he looked at me with the faintest smile. "But I do know one thing." "What?" His thumb brushed lightly against mine. "I definitely wasn't supposed to see you in that parking lot. And honestly, the way he said it sounded a lot like fate. I barely slept that night. Not because anything dramatic happened. Honestly, it was the opposite. Sawyer and I eventually ended up in my bed sometime after 4 o'clock in the morning, both exhausted enough that neither of us had energy left for more kissing or overthinking. But sleeping beside him still felt surreal. At first, we kept a ridiculous amount of space between us, like two nervous teenagers pretending we weren't hyper-aware of each other. That lasted maybe 10 minutes. Eventually, Sawyer shifted closer with a tired sigh. Then his arm brushed mine. Then his knee touched my leg under the blanket. And after that, neither of us bothered pretending anymore. By the time I finally drifted off, Sawyer was asleep beside me, with one arm loosely across my waist like it had always belonged there. I woke up to sunlight spilling across the room. For one confused second, I forgot everything. Then I felt warmth against my back. Strong arms wrapped lightly around me, and immediately every memory from last night crashed back into place. Sawyer was still asleep. I turned my head slightly. Seeing him like this almost didn't feel real. Morning light softened everything about him. His dark hair was a complete mess. His face relaxed in a way I'd honestly never seen before. Usually Sawyer always looked tense somehow, even during normal conversations. Not now. Now he looked peaceful and weirdly vulnerable. My chest tightened painfully at the sight. Like he sensed me looking at him, Sawyer shifted slightly behind me with a low groan before opening his eyes. The second he realized where he was, his expression went blank with panic. Then he looked at me, and everything softened again immediately. "Oh," he muttered sleepily. I smiled. "Good morning to you too." Sawyer buried his face briefly into the pillow beside me. I forgot for 1 second and almost had a heart attack. I laughed quietly. Then he looked back up at me again, still close enough that I could feel his breath. "You're still here," he said softly. Something about the way he said it got to me. "Yeah," I answered. Sawyer stared at me another second before a slow smile spread across his face. And honestly, that smile first thing in the morning was dangerous. "You know," he murmured, voice rough from sleep. "This is the first time I've ever woken up next to someone and not immediately wanted to run away." I raised an eyebrow. "That's specific, huh?" "I'm serious." He looked embarrassed admitting it, but he kept going anyway. "I always thought if I ever crossed this line, I'd freak out afterward." "Did you?" Sawyer looked at me carefully. Then he shook his head once. "No." The honesty in his voice made warmth spread through my chest again. For a while we just stayed there talking quietly. About stupid things mostly. How terrible my coffee was. How badly Sawyer's back hurt from construction work lately. How insane it was that we both secretly liked each other for so long without realizing the feeling was mutual. At one point, Sawyer groaned into the pillow. "You know what kills me?" "What?" "The amount of times I almost said something to you." I turned toward him more fully. "Seriously?" "Yes." He looked horrified by his own confession. "Do you remember that barbecue at my parents' place last summer? The one where your uncle got drunk and started arguing about aliens? That narrows it down 0%. I laughed. Sawyer shook his head, smiling. "You were sitting outside by the pool. Your shirt got wet and, oh my God, I nearly lost my mind. I buried my face in the blanket, laughing. Sawyer pointed at me defensively. You have no idea how difficult you made my life." "Me?" "Yes, you. You're the one built like a Marvel character." That made him grin immediately. "Yeah?" I regretted saying it instantly because the look he gave me afterward turned dangerously confident. "Oh, so you noticed?" "Unfortunately." Sawyer laughed softly and moved a little closer again. The warmth between us now felt natural somehow. Easy. But underneath it all, I could still feel the bigger conversation waiting. Eventually Sawyer's smile faded slightly. I should probably go home soon. The mood shifted immediately. Reality again. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." He exhaled hard and stared at the ceiling for a moment. "My brother's going to kill me if he finds out I got involved with his best friend." I snorted. "Got involved?" Sawyer looked over at me dryly. "Sorry." "Had an emotional identity crisis and fell in love with his best friend." My heart stumbled at the words. Sawyer realized what he'd said half a second later. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't take it back. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then quietly, carefully, I asked, "Fell in love?" Sawyer looked nervous now for the first time all morning. "I know it sounds insane." "No," I said softly, "it doesn't." His expression softened instantly, and for a second it felt like the entire room disappeared around us. Because maybe this was fast, maybe it was messy, but some part of me had wanted him for years already. This didn't feel new, it felt overdue. Sawyer reached for my hand under the blanket and intertwined our fingers again. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted quietly. "You don't have to. But I know I don't want last night to be a one-time thing." My chest tightened painfully hearing that. "Good," I said softly. "Because neither do I." Sawyer smiled again then, smaller this time, realer, and lying there beside him in the morning light, I realized something that honestly should have been obvious from the start. I hadn't just seen Sawyer somewhere he shouldn't have been that night. He had seen me too. And somehow, we both ended up exactly where we were supposed to be. The next 2 weeks felt unreal. Not in some dramatic movie way, just strange. Like the entire world had shifted slightly off balance while nobody else noticed yet. Sawyer and I texted constantly after that night. At first, it was cautious, small things. "You awake? Did you eat yet? Your coffee still sucks, by the way." But it escalated fast. Because once we stopped pretending around each other, it became impossible to go backward. Every conversation suddenly felt loaded. Every glance lasted too long. And every time Sawyer came over to my apartment, we acted like people starving after years of restraint. The weirdest part? Outside of the kissing and attraction, we genuinely fit together. I hadn't expected that. Sawyer was calmer around me than I'd ever seen him before. Less guarded, less tense. He laughed more now, too, which honestly felt unfair because hearing it always made me stupidly happy. But underneath all of it, reality kept creeping closer, especially where his family was concerned. "You know my dad's going to lose his mind eventually," Sawyer muttered one night while we sat on my couch sharing takeout. I glanced over at him. He was sprawled sideways against the cushions with his legs tangled with mine like he belonged there now. "Eventually doesn't mean tonight," Sawyer sighed. Still, he'd been quieter all evening. I could tell something was bothering him. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "My mom asked today why I'd been smiling at my phone so much." I laughed softly. "And?" "I almost drove my truck into a mailbox." That got another laugh out of me, but Sawyer still looked nervous. "I hate lying to them," he admitted quietly. The honesty in his voice hurt a little, because I knew exactly what he meant. Keeping secrets exhausted you after a while, especially when the thing you were hiding actually made you happy. Sawyer leaned back against the couch heavily. "I spent years convincing myself I could avoid this forever." "You can't avoid yourself forever." He looked over at me. You always know exactly what to say. No, I admitted. Usually I panic internally first. That finally made him smile again. Then, after a second, he shifted closer and rested his head lightly against my shoulder. The simple intimacy of that almost got to me more than anything physical ever had. Because Sawyer wasn't naturally clingy. Every soft thing he did felt intentional, real. A few days later, everything finally exploded, and honestly, it happened in the dumbest way possible. Sawyer's younger brother Damon forgot his phone at my apartment after stopping by unexpectedly. Normally, not a big deal, except Sawyer had been in my bedroom wearing nothing but sweatpants when Damon knocked on the door. The look on Sawyer's face when he realized who was outside was pure horror. "Tell me that's not my brother," he whispered. I was already laughing. "You need to hide." "I'm not hiding in your apartment like some affair partner." "You literally are an affair partner." Sawyer glared at me, not helping. Before we could figure anything out, Damon pushed the door open himself, and froze instantly. Sawyer froze too. Nobody spoke. Damon looked from me to Sawyer, then to Sawyer's bare chest, then back to our faces. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, then Damon sighed heavily. "Oh my God." Sawyer looked ready to pass out. "It's not. You're dating Douglas?" Damon interrupted. The room went completely still. Sawyer blinked. "You knew?" Mateo gave him the most unimpressed look I'd ever seen. "You stare at him like he invented oxygen." I started choking, laughing immediately. Sawyer looked deeply betrayed. "You never said anything." "Because I thought you knew," Mateo shot back. Sawyer sat down heavily on the edge of my bed and buried his face in his hands. "I'm actually going to die." "No, you're not," Mateo said. "Mom's going to cry dramatically for a few hours because she thinks everything deserves tears, but she'll survive." Sawyer looked up slowly. "And Dad?" That wiped the amusement off Mateo's face slightly. "We'll deal with Dad later." The room went quieter after that, because everybody knew what he meant. Sawyer's father wasn't subtle about his opinions. I reached over and touched Sawyer's arm lightly. He looked at me immediately, and something in his expression softened again. Mateo noticed too. "You guys are disgustingly into each other," he muttered. Neither of us even denied it. The conversation with Sawyer's parents happened 3 days later, and honestly, it was rough. His father got angry exactly the way Sawyer expected. Raised voice, harsh words, the kind of disappointment that sits heavy in your chest long after the conversation ends. Sawyer left their house shaking with anger afterward. I still remember the way he stood outside beside his truck, breathing hard while trying not to completely lose it. He looked at me like I was a stranger. He said quietly, I didn't know what to say to that. So, instead, I just stepped closer and wrapped my arms around him. Sawyer held on to me immediately, tight, like I was the only stable thing he had left in that moment. And maybe I was. Eventually, he exhaled slowly against my shoulder. "You know what's weird?" he muttered. "What?" "I thought losing my family's approval would destroy me." I pulled back enough to look at him. "And?" Sawyer's eyes searched mine carefully. "But somehow I still feel freer than I ever have before." That nearly broke my heart, because I knew how hard that freedom had cost him already. The months after that weren't perfect. Some family members adjusted, some didn't. Sawyer still struggled sometimes with guilt and fear and years of repression that don't just disappear overnight. But through all of it, he stopped hiding. That was the important part. No more pretending. No more standing outside doors too scared to walk through them. One night, about 6 months later, Sawyer and I ended up downtown again after dinner. Completely by accident, we passed the same street where we'd first seen each other outside the club. Sawyer stopped walking immediately. I looked over at him. He was staring at the neon sign down the block with this strange expression on his face. "You okay?" I asked. He laughed softly under his breath. "Just thinking." "About what?" Sawyer looked at me. Then he reached for my hand openly right there on the sidewalk. No hesitation, no fear. "I spent my whole life thinking seeing you there was the worst thing that could have happened to me," he admitted quietly. The city lights reflected softly in his eyes. "But it turned out to be the best." And honestly, standing there with his hand in mine while traffic moved around us and the whole world kept going like normal, I believed him completely. I believed him completely.